So Lara's actually very kindly done a bit of the introduction for me. So as she said, this is something that the full report, the full annual trends report, is something that we would typically give out at this event. But mindful of how important those trends have proved to many of you in the room over the last few years, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have you leaving today empty-handed without some of those really interesting snippets that you can take into your kind of strategizing for the year ahead. So the report itself will be released at the end of April. So I'll talk to you in a bit about how you can make sure you can request a copy for yourselves. But the annual trends report, or the home shopping trends report, has been something that we've been doing now for about 5 or 6 years, and it's really gone from strength to strength each year, with more content each year, and the 2016 report is no different. So as you can see here, it will include the usual trends, so 2014 compared to 2015, but a whole lot more as well, and this is just a snippet of what they'll be. One really interesting piece is some analysis that Michele's team have done on when does spring start, which I think some of you in the room may have already seen. But that's a big question that a lot of you gardening brands out there will find yourself asking each year. How do we maximise spring? When do we do our campaigns? What sort of campaigns do we do, etc.? So Michele will touch on a little preview of that in a moment, but the full report will be in the home shopping trends. We've got industry leader interviews, so as we always have, and this year, Aaron from Easy Life, Dara from JD Williams, Joanna from Plums and Lynn from Damart have already given us an interview, which is great, and thank you very much to them. I should say there's still an opportunity to get involved. So if there's anybody here that would like the prestige or the free PR of being in the report, or purely if you just have some really interesting insights that you would like to share with your fellow marketeers, then please do speak to myself or Lara or any of the Abacus team during the course of today, and we'd be happy to talk about how we could get you in there. An economic review from Capital Economics. So I think everybody will agree that session this morning from Mark was really, really interesting. And I think this is a vital part of the report because it puts the home shopping trends that the Abacus are reporting on excuse me, into the context of the UK and the global economy. So some really interesting insight that we'll have over and above what we had this morning. And then this last bit I think is fascinating. So there's probably nobody in this room that hasn't in some way been affected by slightly strange weather patterns in the last few years, in terms of in terms of stock, in terms of the marketing you've done, in terms of sales, etc. So Planalytics, who will be talking later on about this, have also included some really interesting insight into how you can measure and manage the impacts of weather on your campaigns and on your business. So there's loads of stuff there we're really excited about bringing to you when the report is ready in just over a month's time. So before Michele goes on and talks about some of the sort of specific trends that we've seen in some of the key categories, we just wanted to put it in a bit of context for everyone and look at a couple of widely reported trends from last year. So the first is on Black Friday. So I'm sure, again, there's nobody in this room that hasn't had discussions about Black Friday in the last year or two. If there are, it's time to start thinking about it because it's here to stay. So you can see there, not only did consumers shun the high street to shop online for Black Friday last year, but they also dug deeper and splashed more cash. So interestingly, not only was there much more money spent on Black Friday than there ever has been in the UK in previous years, a larger share of that has moved online, which is obviously very important for you guys to think about for two reasons. One, there's an opportunity to maximise your revenues around Black Friday, and two, you need to think about that trend towards online. But it's really interesting because in the US, Black Friday is very much an in-store proposition, very much a kind of high street proposition. But in the UK, it appears to be much more of an online thing. And the second quote we have from Deloitte is looking at some of the other things that have affected trends last year. So again, the warmest December on record had an impact for a lot of people, particularly those who had very obvious winter lines because there was a large amount of discounting. So obviously that would have had an effect on the bottom lines. There was also the weather up north, which had regional impacts on trading, and I was speaking to someone at the break just now about how up in Leeds we had snow for a day a couple of weeks ago, and then it disappeared again overnight. So, very kind of unpredictable weather patterns can have an impact on people's businesses. And also the effect of the terrorist attacks in Paris at the end of last year. So again, there seems to be a trend towards people not wanting to go to major city centres, major shopping centres, and actually staying at home and making their purchases online. So some of those things are hard to predict, but they can have an impact on your business. And hopefully that sort of puts into context some of the stuff that Michele will now talk to you about.
Thanks, Ben. So as we sort of saw from Mark's presentation earlier, the UK actually had a pretty good year in 2015. We had 2.4% growth in GDP, we had 3% growth in consumer spending, and then 15.7% growth in the mail order and internet sort of sector, which is what the ONS defines as a non-store retail. Now, the ONS unfortunately doesn't go into category level trends for that sector, so that's where our report comes in. So helping you to answer the question, okay, the sector is growing, but how did my category do in 2015? So the full report will cover 6 categories. We call them macro categories because we aggregate some of the 21 different product categories we have on the Alliance. The ones we're covering today are clothing, food and wine, and gardening, and they're randomly selected, so we don't prioritize based on anything else. Generalist retail, gifts, gadgets and entertainment, and home interiors and household goods will be covered in the full report. To qualify for the analysis, basically brands had to be active throughout 2014 and 2015, and we sort of had to have received sort of full transactional information up to the end of December. By the time we started working on the analysis, which is about a month ago. As you will see, we're presenting trends in terms of revenue, but also mailing volumes. The mailing volume figures come from Ubiquity. They run a panel that basically measures what is landing, in households' mailboxes. So it's not linked to Abacus data or how much data Abacus is selling. It's based on what is actually dropping on the consumer sort of doorstep. So before we go into the actual trends, I want to sort of talk you through what we are showing there. So you have a set of bars and then 2 lines. The bars represent the revenue trends, and you have a dark blue bar, which is the revenue for 2014, and then a light blue one, which is the revenue for 2015. The lines follow the same idea, fortunately. So the blue one is the mailing volumes for 2014, and the dark blue one, and the light blue one is the mailing volumes for 2015. We don't show the actual figures. What we're showing there is an index, and it's an index to the 24-month average. So what we do is to take the total revenue for the 2 years, we divide it by 24, that gives us the monthly sort of average for the period, and then we compare each month to that average. So for example, in January, if you look at the light blue bar, you have an index of 93. That is about 7% before the average for the 2-year period. In March, for the blue bar, again, you have an index of 106. That means that March was 6% above the average for the period. That makes sense? Hopefully. So how did clothing do in 2015? So revenue was up 10.7% year on year. So not as much as the 15.7% that we saw for the overall sort of non-store retail sector, but fairly close and still double digits. There was growth in every month, but some months sort of grew faster than others. The top three were September, June, and November. I'm just going to focus on September and November because they're bigger months to start with. So in September 2015, we saw 16.7% growth year on year. And I think the explanation there is partly in what happened in that month in 2014. So I don't know if you remember, but clothing retailers had a very slow start of the autumn-winter season in 2014 because the weather was very, very warm in September. So that probably depressed the September's figures for 2014, and therefore you're seeing a big jump this year when sort of the weather reverted to the normal pattern. November, I don't think we can sort of blame the weather for that change. I think the explanation there is to be looked into Black Friday, which is becoming again bigger and bigger, as Ben was saying, and we definitely saw more retailers sort of pushing out offers around that day, and that might have sort of pulled some of the December revenue into November. Interestingly, in December, and this sort of fits with what Ben was saying earlier, but also fits with, I think, what Planalytics are going to say later, there was still some growth in December, about 5%, but that's half the rate for the entire year. And I think there, again, we saw the weather playing a role, with December being very warm and clothing retailers struggling to push coats and heavy jumpers. In terms of mailing volumes, they were down about 14.5% year on year. Interestingly, we saw them up in January and February, then down through the middle of the year, so March to October, and then up again in November and December. And for some reason, we saw a similar trend in other categories as well. So it might be that there's some sort of rebalancing going on there. Next category is gardening. Gardening struggled a lot in the last few years. I think it was down in terms of revenue, definitely in 2013. Last year was stable. I think it was minus 0.3%. But finally this year we saw some growth. So revenue was up 6.6% year on year. We saw some very good growth at the beginning of the spring, which is a very big season for gardening. So I think between January and February there was 13% growth year on year. March didn't peak as high as it did in 2014, but the revenue sort of trend, as you can see, stayed at a very high level in April and continued in May. So that allowed gardening brands to have a very good spring season in 2015. Autumn winter was more on par with 2014. We saw growth only in December, and then actually towards the end of the year, sort of September. Towards the end of the year, November and December, actually it was down a little bit compared to 2014. So again, strongest growth there in May, as we saw earlier, September, April, with revenue down in March and November. In terms of mailing volumes, there was a significant cutback in 2015. As we saw for clothing, mailing volumes were up in the first 2 months of the year, January and February. I feel a bit like the weatherman here, but anyway. And then sort of close to what we saw for 2014, at the end of the year, it's in the sort of central part of the year that retailers cut back on mailing volumes. Now, Ben mentioned that we ran some analysis on when spring starts in the gardening sector. So having worked with a few gardening brands, when it comes to sort of planning for the year, there's a question that comes out and is, are people starting to garden at the same time in Brighton, and Inverness? So there might still be some snow on the ground in Inverness when in Brighton is actually, getting more springy. So what we did in 2015 is to sort of upgrade our mapping capabilities. So we've got a tool called GeoConcept, which we now use for this sort of analysis. And we thought, okay, we've got the data to look into it. Let's give it a go. What we're showing there is one of the maps we created. But basically, what you're seeing is when each sort of region or area reaches 50% of the total spring revenue. We sort of looked at 3 years, so 2013, 2014, and 2015. So it's quite robust, I think. And the dark green areas are those in which we reached that point early, so between the 14th and the 16th of March. And sort of the light green ones are the ones where we reach 50% of spring sales later, between the 22nd and the 30th of March. So first thing, there isn't a north-south divide. As you can see there, there's dark green area at the very top of Scotland. There's light green areas, in Wales, certainly sort of southern England. So there isn't any reason to sort of stack the mailings. You can quite confidently go out at the same time throughout the country. But what we also saw is that the light green areas tend to be around cities or major sort of urban areas in the UK. And we couldn't find an explanation initially because cities actually tend to be a bit warmer than the corresponding countryside. So there is no reason for gardeners to be out later in cities. But what we sort of think is happening there is that the products that are purchased by city dwellers are not the same ones as those that are both in the countryside. So if you live in London, you're unlikely to have a garden big enough where you can plant a lot of bulbs and seeds. So you're probably more inclined to buy ready to plant plugs that you can just stick in your window box. And those tend to be ready later in the season. So it's very probable that the reason why we're seeing those differences is linked to the products people are buying in the cities. So we got quite good feedback about this from the brands we talked to. So we're probably going to run similar things for other categories. For example, clothing. We could see some differences there. So we'll keep you in the loop. But if there's any sort of project you'd like to look at, which is based on mapping or driving times or anything like that, let us know. The last category we're presenting today is food and wine. The first thing you'll notice is that there's no lines, so there's no mailing volumes. That's not because they don't mail in that category, but it's because the ubiquity sample doesn't have enough coverage to allow us to say confidently that the trends for that category are correct. So we left those out. As you can see, revenue was up very significantly in that category, more than the 15.7% for the overall sector. You can also see that the revenue was up every single months, but the growth really was concentrated in the last 3 months of the year. So if we look at January to September, the growth there, it was only about 15%. But then really kicked off in October, November and December. And those being larger months to start with, meant that Christmas was very heavy for that category this year. In terms of hypothesis there, and again, we're not expert in selling wine or food, but what we think is happening is that consumers are becoming more comfortable buying food and wine online, but there's still a certain level of convenience. So if you're only buying, say, a bottle of wine, you might just pick it up from the local store. However, when you're buying 12 bottles of Prosecco to last you through the Christmas period, well, then you might go online and put in a big order, and that might be why we're seeing more growth in those months. So just to summarize, clothing was up 10.7% year on year, with September being the strongest month. Gardening, after a few years of struggle, was up 6.6%, which is a very good rate of growth. And then food and wine, the champion in this mini league, was up 17.5%, which is amazing. And the strongest month for them was November. Is there a Black Friday factor in there as well? I can't say for sure, but it's quite probable.
Thanks, Michele. So I think, as you'll all agree, it's a very positive message that we can see from these categories anyway. And that ties in quite nicely with what Mark was talking about this morning with increased consumer confidence. These trends, apart from gardening, are not unusual. We've seen growth certainly in the last few years in this report, so certainly seems to fit in nicely with that wider view. A couple of things that I wanted to just share with everybody before we wrap up. So it is possible for you to compare your own revenue trends against those of your category within the Home Shopping Trends report. It's available to all Abacus Alliance members, completely free. We can do it using the existing data that we have for you, so no need to provide any additional data supplies. And we'll interpret those results and report them back in a kind of an easy to digest way. So if you're interested to see what your revenue trends look like against your particular part of the market, then do come and speak to myself or Michele or your account manager during the course of today. But the thing to say about that report, so the one I've just mentioned, and also the Home Shopping Trends report in general, it is an overview of the home shopping market, and it's an overview of certain subcategories within that marketplace. It isn't bespoke to your business. So we thought we'd mention something that is bespoke to your business. So some of you will know the Market Insight Report, or MIR, quite well. Others in the room will probably never have heard of this before. But essentially what this does, as you can see at the top, it takes insight to the next level, and that's all because it's looking specifically at your business and your corner of the marketplace. So what the report does is it builds up a bespoke category, so it looks at who your kind of key competitors are, and then it allows us to build a competitive marketplace for you based on the data in the alliance. And then you can compare your own activity and your own customers' behaviour with you and the rest of the competitive marketplace, which is really helpful not just to tell you who you should target for a campaign, but actually to help with your wider strategy. So there's a few ways in which it can be used. The first is to analyse your market share and performance against competitors, so you can identify whether the key growth opportunity for you in the months ahead might be actually to try and get some of that market share back. Or conversely, it might validate that you actually have the majority of that share and growth opportunities might be elsewhere for you. It also allows you to optimize your seasonal mailing plan, so you can get your offer right, your creative right, you can certainly get the data right, but then using this report you can get the timing right. So what this report does is split down the year into 52 weeks, and it looks at the revenue trends across each week of the year, and it allows you to find out the optimal point to drop your campaign to ensure that you can maximize the ROI. So a really valuable part of the report. The third one is planning your merchandising and marketing strategy. So the Market Insight report will allow you to see what we call category penetration. So essentially what else your customers are buying across the Abacus Alliance, what other types of brands they buy from. And that will allow you to plan things like online or in-store merchandising, cross-sell opportunities, whether you should include different product ranges in your mix. And it can also inform your marketing activity. So what other affiliate opportunities might there be? Could there be catalogue or publication or product dispatch inserts that you haven't previously thought about that you could do? So again, it gives you that much wider view of sort of insight, which you can then use to enhance your wider strategy. And the last one is evaluating your business performance for M&A. So if you're out there looking to try and attract an investor, or conversely, if you're out there looking to make an acquisition yourself, the Market Insight report gives you a really good snapshot of what your business currently looks like. So, as you would imagine, for something with that level of specific detail, it's not a free report, it is a charged report, but it's £1,500, but the value that you get back from it, I think those in the room that have used it would certainly say far outweighs that. So, if you haven't come across this before or would like to have a think about the benefits to your business, then do speak to, probably not myself in the detail, but Michele or your account manager. I've pretty much told you all I know on that. So that's it. So the only thing left to say is, as I mentioned, the report will be available at the end of April. So we want to make sure that everybody in the room that would like one will get one. So there's two ways you can do that. Either come to me and give me a business card, or scribble on a bit of paper your name, email address and postal address, or perhaps easier, email the lovely Sarah on that email address and she'll make sure that one gets sent out to you as soon as we go to print in just over a month's time.